very, very lucky to have Dr. Mastroianni, because he's actually going to focus on this. He's going to focus on this extremely important link between security and the environment. So please, without any further ado, please join me in welcoming Dr. Mastroianni here at Ca' Foscari. Thank you.
Thank you everyone for being here this afternoon. I wanted to thank Professor Legrenzi and the university for hosting me in such a beautiful place. It is quite an emotion. First, I have one promise. I will not be too long. And second, he has been talking to you about my own person. And I will start from that point. Not because I have the illusion that you're interested in my life, but because it could give you a hint of what's my perspective. Actually, he said, yeah, at the beginning I was focusing on negotiation and conflict resolution. And that's how I arrived to the environment. If you think about conflict, the way I used to, which was about formal means to solve them, then you start asking yourself, but what's going to cause a conflict in the near future? And that's how the environment came up. Once again, I'm sure you're not really interested in what was my process of mind, but this might be important to give you an idea of a perspective. I do not belong to any green movement. Hearing this speech, at times you might have the impression that I belong to some protest underground group. No, I'm here to convey to you some reflections which actually belong more to the official culture. I'm talking more in the terms of Davos Economic Forum rather than Porto Alegre Social Forum. Even so, maybe you could be surprised at some of these considerations. So, we can start. The title that you see there is not exactly the title of the conference, but I decided to modify it a little bit just to get you into the main idea. System Earth is interconnected. It's a global balance of a small planet in which every factor reacts to every factor. To make things a little bit clear, I will tell you how we're going to go about this speech. It will be in three parts. The first one devoted to demonstrating, although I know that with an audience like this, it's not necessary, that we all belong to the same system and that everyone is important. The second part is a kind of scenario of what could happen if we do not protect the environment, if we do not take some measures which are starting to emerge as absolutely urgent. The third part, it's the opposite scenario. What happens if we decide to seriously work in protecting the environment? And although it's not a good strategy for writers, for thrillers writers, I'm going to anticipate the conclusions we are heading to. If we do not protect the environment, we are very close to creating a situation of what specialists call systemic chaos. Global instability, conflicts, lack of certainty. In other words, a world which will be much worse than the one we have known in the last 50 years. If we do protect the environment, and this is maybe the most important message I would like to convey to you, even if we don't want to, almost automatically, we are going to increase peace, security, stability, and in general, quality of life. This might be a little bit surprising because we are used to think of the environment as though it was something else. You know, we live on it, but it's separated from us. If there is a disaster in the environment, it concerns the environment. Symbolically, it's endangered species, etc. It could be their own problem. Maybe it's going to be our own problem, and in a very, very dangerous way. So the whole basis of this reasoning is the idea that we are part of a global system where everything is interconnected. I am sure you all remember the film The Matrix, where a machine created a virtual world. Well, our world is not so different. As I said, and I will repeat it many times, although I'm sure you have already understood, we are all interconnected into this global matrix. You probably recognize this photo. It was the iconic photo when the first activists tried to alert the world about the dangers of global warming. We see the poor polar bear hanging on his chunk of ice, the only remnant of his habitat. Now, when we see this photo, we are all kind of caught by compassion. We think, oh, poor guy, what's going to happen to him? But then if I go back, after 2 minutes, automatically, we don't think about him anymore. It's just non-important. Not because we are mean people, we have no morals or things like that, but just because this is human nature. Think about all those TV spots that try to convince you to donate some money for some human causes, like starving children or victims of an earthquake or things like that. You will agree with me that when they run these films, at the end, there is an appeal. They say, call now to donate. Call at once to donate. Why? Because they know that 2 minutes after the film has passed, you will not think about them anymore. Why? It's because we are hardwired by evolution with two complementary instincts. The first one is to think about ourselves. It is absolutely essential for our survival. We have to be protecting our own interests. But this kind of instinct, if it was an absolute instinct, would lead us to be in constant war one with the other. So evolution has hardwired us with another instinct, which is what we call empathy or compassion. It is rooted in some circuits of neural cells called mirror neurons. Since it is a product of evolution, it works according to the situation that has been mankind's situation for centuries and centuries and centuries. Actually, it makes us react in a solidaristic way when we see someone who is in a difficult situation. Generally another human being, but it could also be an animal like the poor polar bear. Instinctively, when we see someone who is in a difficult situation, we tend to solidarize with him. And that's a mechanism which is very important because it introduces the possibility of groups to cooperate, and groups who cooperate on their turn, they have an evolutionary advantage. They can survive. You will ask, why am I running through all this? That seems to have nothing to do with that. The reason why is that when we see this polar bear, we care about him for 2 minutes when we see him, and then we just instinctively think, well, what the heck, who cares? I mean, I've never seen a polar bear in my life. Except that the fate of this guy is very, very important for us. The title of the slide is The Butterfly Effect. You have probably heard about the butterfly effect. Actually, it's an easy way to approach a concept which is a little bit more technical, which is called sensitive dependence to initial conditions. It was elaborated by the mathematician Alan Turing in the 50s. And he said that the displacement of one single electron of 1/1,000,000th of a millimeter in a certain year could be the first event that will determine whether a certain person the following year will be killed by an avalanche or not. In other terms, what he said is even very small events can, after a chain of actions and reactions, can turn out to have disproportionate consequences. This dimension is better known with the phrase, the flapping of the wings of a butterfly in Tokyo could be the first event that leads to a hurricane in Florida. So in this perspective, why do we have to recognize that evolution has given us instruments that are not any more up to date to the current situation? Before, our range of action was limited. Before globalization, and especially before the Industrial Revolution, our range of action was limited. So evolution that gave us instruments that forced us to solidarize with people we saw is not a sensible driver of our actions anymore. Let's think about this bear. Who cares? Except that if polar bears go instinct, there could be a proliferation of seals. Seals eat huge quantities of the fishes on which the economy of Iceland and many northern states is based on. And in their turn, the lack of these fishes could lead to the proliferation of other species that could create other imbalances in other areas of the sea. So, from the fate of this polar bear, at the end of the chain, in the perspective of the flapping of the wings of the butterfly, we could, for instance, find ourselves with some populations on the coast of Africa who get without their source of income. Because due to the chain reaction, the fishes that they used to fish are not there anymore. What do these people do? Suddenly, because these phenomena very often happen in a very brief time, suddenly these people find themselves without a hope. They were fishermen. They cannot be fishermen anymore, but their state is not so organized, and so what? It starts to bubble, and you start to have migrations, you start to have stress, and maybe some of them become pirates. It looked like piracy belonged to novels of the 1700s and 1800s. Nowadays we have pirates. And climate change is not totally without a fault to that. They could become terrorists because they are desperate. And so maybe that in a chain of events that starts with the ill fate of this polar bear, some of us, sorry, I don't want to, to forecast ill fates for anyone, but some of us could be on a plane which ends up being shot down by one of these terrorists. Now, this of course looks like an abstract reasoning, but I'll give you something which is not an hypothesis. Some time ago, someone decided to introduce heavy cattle in African savannas. Except that heavy cattle erodes the roots of African grasslands. So these areas turn quite quickly from savannas to semi-desertic areas. This in turn caused a severe problem of income and security. The only solution for these people was to resort to some sort of competition, which became a violent competition. This led to the establishing of a new form of power based on somehow world lordship. And here we have a situation of instability in an important area of Africa. But anyway, the butterfly effect is kind of discouraging, because if system Earth is so complicated that even the movement of one single electron for 1 million millimeter, etc., we might be tempted to say, well, but then what can I do? In such a complex system, no matter what my initiatives are, there will always be something happening that will prevent me from getting to my goal. Except that Earth, in its complication, in its extreme intricacies of relationships, is a chaotic system, but it's also a chaotic system which is in balance. Balance means that throughout the years, throughout the constant repetition of one fundamental movement, which is the orbit of our planet again, around its star, this chaos has been kind of caged, framed into something that we can forecast, something that we can rely on to plan for the future. So a struggle between chaos, the intricacy of this matrix that governs planet Earth, where everyone is interlinked with everyone, and balance. Balance is the repetition of predictable cycles. This is one aspect of balance, but well, the one that interests us now. Who cares about balance? This question might seem, superfluous, except that if we think about ourselves as human beings, when we have an objective, normally we define this objective in terms of growth, in terms of victory, in terms of expansion. But we never think that balance is an objective worth defending. Except that without balance, there is no expansion, there is no victory, there is no growth. If you, for instance, eliminate the balance that gives us 4 seasons, you cannot have agriculture. If you cannot have agriculture, you cannot plan to sustain a civilization. And it brings a leap from balance to chaos in this struggle which we were talking about. In this global system, characterized by a struggle between chaos and balance, we have to understand that there are 2 aspects of globality. The first one is the most obvious one, it's geographic globality. Planet Earth doesn't really care about the boundaries that us men have built. And we are part of planet Earth, we are not only mankind. Say, oh, this is obvious. Actually, it is not so obvious. Once again, strange instincts kick in to make the behavior of people rather irrational. There were some studies about a phenomenon called border bias. I'll give you the idea. It was a test, a simulation, and in which the scenario was the explosion of a nuclear plant. And they asked volunteers to rate their fear of this explosion. Except that one group of volunteers was located in a city 100 kilometers from the nuclear plant in the same state. And another group of volunteers was asked to imagine that they were inhabitants of a city 20 kilometers away from the power plant, but in another state, with a frontier. Now, strangely enough, those who were asked to imagine that they were living in a city 20 kilometers away from the power plant, but in another country, expressed less anxiety than those who were asked to imagine that they lived 100 kilometers away from the power plant, but in the same country. So instinctively, we give a lot of importance to the frontiers, to the boundaries, but this is not the case. As the butterfly effect kind of demonstrates, a small thing happening in Tokyo can have very powerful consequences in Florida. There is another aspect of globality, of the matrix, of Gaia's matrix, which is a little bit more important to understand, which is systemic globality. We are used to reason in terms of categories, of sectors. I work in the oil sector, so I see the world from the point of view of the oil sector, and the rest is less important. I work in another sector, and that's it. I am an economist, or I am a political scientist, I am a doctor, or something like that. Except that the matrix that governs the small planet that we inhabit links every kind of phenomenon with every other kind of phenomenon. Now, if we wanted to make a model of this complexity, it would be impossible for us. We just don't have enough computational capability to model all the interactions that range from volcanic eruptions to meteorites, migration of species, and elections in the USA. But we can try to find some way to harness this complexity into a good synthesis. And one good synthesis is the one that I propose to you, to understand how things relate one to the other. It's this matrix. It's a very basic matrix that establishes a relationship between environment, peace, human rights, and peace and stability. I can recall another example, a little bit like the one about African savannas. The lack of an agricultural reform in Brazil left a few people owners of huge expansions of land. And this was an economic decision, a development decision. This, with mechanization, left many of the people who were working on this huge farmlands without a job. In a situation in which they had no social protection. And here we have a human rights problem, because they had serious problems for survival to send their children to schools. So what did they decide to do? They decide to migrate towards cities, fueling those famous slums, which are called favelas, in which violence was nurtured, and we have a problem of stability. And another bunch of them went up north towards Amazonia, and started, since Amazonia was kind of no one's land, they started to cut the forest, to raise cattle or cultivate some of their crops. And we have an environmental problem. That's how it works. We are in a global matrix, which is a small planet in which boundaries have no importance, and reasoning in terms of sector by sector just doesn't make sense, because everyone and everything is interconnected. And it is in this perspective that I have a very bad task. For the next 15 minutes, I will scare you. But I will not scare you just to have a theater effect. I will scare you telling you the truth. What is going to happen if we do not care about the environment? But please keep in mind what we've been saying about the interconnectedness of this global village, which is a little planet. Once again, you will ask, what the hell is this guy going, what does he have to do with this speech? I think you recognize him. He is quite a famous fellow. Well, during centuries, we were used to interpret the causes of war, linking them to the ambitions of generals and kings and things like that. More seriously, we were interpreting the causes of war according to a doctrine that normally I have to explain to other audiences, but you're all into international studies, the doctrine of the balance of power. Except that with two tragedies in the 20th century, the First and the Second World War, some hints which belong to the 19th century, to the thought of the 19th, were developed in a pragmatical way. And especially we realized something which is very important, that the actor of peace or war is not the state. The real main character, the real driver of peace or war is the human being. The state is just a box in it. In this perspective, we came to interpret, for instance, the Second World War as a consequence of the stress which was suffered by the German middle class between the two wars, due to sanctions, due to the financial crisis of 1929. This, which is absolutely natural to us, for us to think, was a huge leap, a huge progress in political thought. We realized that social stress, lack of security is the best grounds to have a conflict. And we say, since the German middle class could not rely anymore on some of its securities like financial gains or salaries, they were so stressed that became irrational, and as the most cultivated people of Europe, they were taken into the folly of calling Adolf Hitler to power. Now, just, how would I say, reserve this reasoning, keep it in mind, and let's just take an example, climate change. I want to stress that climate change now is the most debated form of environmental erosion. It is a very serious factor. It is well documented. It is studied a lot, so we can take it as an example. But please, it is not the only problem that we have created to environment. There are other huge problems, like, for instance, the depletion of the stock of fishes. And the real bond is the sum and the interaction of all these problems together. But anyway, let's just focus on climate change. I know that I don't have to convince you. I am in a university, so I hope there is no negationist in here. If there is one, we can have a chat afterwards. But it is still quite useful to remind some things about climate change before going forward with our reasoning. We think about greenhouse effect as some sort of sweet growth, gradual growth of intake of solar radiation. Well, at the point where we are, the greenhouse effect means there's a B missing. The actual over-intake of energy of our planet due to man-made greenhouse effect has been calculated as being equivalent to 400,000 Hiroshima bombs per day. It is huge. What does it make? It means that system Earth intakes energy, and all systems, when they intake energy, and this energy cannot escape out, start to vibrate. And when vibration is excessive, normally structures do collapse, especially if there is a resonance phenomenon. So And when we think about this collapse, we think about the natural system, and we instinctively perceive ourselves, human beings, as a group that benefits from it, but it is separate from it. Actually, this is not true. We are part of it, and we can suffer a lot. Where are we? As far as we know, there is some uncertainty. Global warming, the greenhouse effect, has caused an average increase in temperature between 0.78 degrees centigrade and 0.85. Another number that we have to keep in mind is this 2 degrees threshold. Scientists, politicians, policymakers know that the trend can cause very serious problems, and that beyond a certain increase in average temperature, the situation will become a disaster, systemic chaos. We don't know exactly where, but as an international and formal agreement, normally this threshold is identified in 2 degrees centigrade. Why is it called a catastrophe threshold? Because when we reach 2 degrees centigrade, the situation will be in itself complicated, but also because beyond 2 degrees centigrade, we kickstart some effects that are called positive loop feedback. In other terms, we put the system in a condition in which it will itself fuel more global warming. And this justifies the worst case scenario, which is considered by scientists, which is an increase in average temperature of 5.8 degrees centigrade. 5.8 degrees centigrade, I will show you why, is a global disaster, global catastrophe scenario. In all this, we have to understand all this, we have to take into account this phenomenon. With global warming, but with many aggressions to the environmental balance, there is something that happens, that is that causes keep accumulating in the dark. You have more and more causing effects that are injected into the system, and then you would expect consequences to appear proportionally. The more you heat the atmosphere, the more you have consequences, but actually it doesn't work like that. Normally you heat, almost nothing happens until suddenly you have non-linear impacts. All the consequences come out together in a very short time. So why? Is this a strange thing? No. Actually, no. I will explain it to you later on, but it is because we kickstart some acceleration cycles. Anyway, now we come back to the reasoning that we had with this photo of Adolf Hitler. Once we have established some facts about climate change. Adolf Hitler, the German middle class stressed by the 1929 crisis, became so irrational that they called to power Adolf Hitler, and this in turn triggered the Second World War. Now imagine the following scenario. Just imagine that glaciers on the Himalaya melt. There has been some debate about this hypothesis, but it was about the timing. If global warming progresses the way it is, they will melt. If they melt, the mechanism that gives to the Indian subcontinent, Southeast Asia, and Central Asia a manageable and constant flux of water will be disrupted. And you remember the previous slide in which we showed non-linear impacts. This kind of phenomenon can happen in a very short time. So, If you have all of a sudden Himalaya glaciers melting, you have all of a sudden a reality in which Central Asia, Southeast Asia, Indian subcontinent do not have a constant intake of water, but they will suffer from two very abrupt seasons: extreme drought and gigantic floods. This will disrupt infrastructure, but above all, will damage very, very seriously agriculture. So, in a short period of time, you have a population of 2 billion people that suddenly have very serious problems accessing fresh water, food, and all the rest. Now compare this kind of stress with the one that triggered Second World War. And you will agree with me that the Germans decided what they decided because they had inflation. What do those 2 billion people have to do when they lack not money, but rice, water, bread, all of a sudden? Now, add to this that in this area, 4 states, India, Pakistan, China, and Russia, have nuclear bombs. And you have the recipe of a possible, very, very big disaster. At this stage of the talk, I'm quite sure that some of you are thinking, he is crazy. These are the tipping points. I can skip them. Now, forecasting that you would think that I am crazy, I would like to call in an association called the Bulletin of Atomic Scientists. I don't know if you've ever heard about them, but they're the association of the most prominent atomic and nuclear scientists in the world. I think we can take them seriously. In their board of directors, there are 17 Nobel Prizes. Well, among other things, since the Cold War, they managed an instrument called the Doomsday Clock, l'orologio dell'Apocalisse. You're probably not familiar with it anymore, but people of my generation are, because it was the clock through which they showed how close we were to nuclear holocaust. During the Cold War, nuclear holocaust was something that really worried us. And it works like this. If the situation becomes more dangerous and closer to a nuclear war, the pointers get closer to midnight. Midnight symbolizes nuclear holocaust. If the situation relaxes and is more peaceful, less tense, then the pointers get a little bit further away from midnight. It was moved, I wrote there 23 times, now it's 24. And the moment in which it was closer to midnight, it was during the Cuba Missiles Crisis. Then, with the end of the Cold War, it went back, except that in 2007, the board of the Atomic Scientists Bulletin decided to put the indicators closer to midnight. Why? Also because of climate change. They consider the Himalaya scenario as something serious. If you take some scientific reviews like Scientific American, once again, is not a magazine run by some utopian or apocalyptic sect. It's just, it belongs to the Nature publishing groups, the more prestigious scientific magazine. There are some articles that forecast this situation. This is, in a very basic way, how climate change can affect our security. Is it something that concerns our grandchildren or generations beyond? Actually, no. Plenty of studies converge into identifying 2030 as a possible catastrophe threshold. On the natural side, because if we progress with CO2 emissions the way we are progressing, roughly we will have the famous 2 degrees centigrade threshold around that time. It could be 2035, it could be 2029, we don't know exactly, but around that time. But also for other reasons. Instability has already been injected into our society due to environmental problems and, in our case, due to climate change. Matteo knows that 3 years ago I published an article which was considered crazy, that explained the so-called Arab Springs, also in terms of climate change. 2 years later, some of the Americans' major think tanks adopted the same opinion, the same approach. How would it work? Well, Arab Springs, before the Arab Springs, there were some uprisings which had no ideological background whatsoever. There were uprisings, there were protests of people who were just hungry. Why? Because there was a phenomenon called food hyperinflation. The price of food went up very much, especially basic products like rice, wheat, etc. Why did it happen like that? They said speculation, but speculation in turn was triggered by a shortage of offer, and shortage of offer in turn was triggered by climate change. In places like Australia, United States, Argentina, and things like that. So it shows that even if climate change has an impact in one part of the world, like Australia or Argentina, see the butterfly effect, which in this case takes the form of the globalization of economies. It brings an increase in the price of food, which is felt and suffered in poorer areas of the world, where there was already some instability, like the Middle East. And I don't say that it determined, but I say that it significantly contributed to the Arab Springs. This kind of very serious effects are already felt in many parts of the world. Agriculture in the United States, for instance, there is already a big fight about the Arctic. Why? Because now that the Arctic is melting, there are new resources that are coming out. The US Geological Survey estimates that 87% of the new energy sources are located in the Arctic, which becomes accessible. There are also marine routes which are becoming accessible. And they're worth billions and billions. Once again, Mastroianni is crazy, except that you take a magazine called Foreign Affairs. Foreign Affairs is not exactly a progressive, utopic magazine. It's a very heavy, scholarly magazine linked with the government. One of the most boring things to read in the world. And in 2009, they published an article by a guy called Scott Borgeson. The title was The New War for the Arctic. Resources in the Arctic are the object of a competition between rational states. So up to now, this competition has been maintained within a peaceful framework. They will discuss in front of the UN what belongs to whom and things like that. But in the meantime, just to make sure, all the military apparatuses of the interested states in the Arctic have been scaled up, and there have already been some military incidents, although these are not reported by the press. So we have many, many situations of tension that are building up due to climate change. And according to the rate it progresses, this instability could become systemic around 2030. You don't believe me? Once again, I don't know if you managed to read the author of this report. National Intelligence Council. Once again, another group of crazy people who don't really have a notion of reality, and they are very progressive. Actually, the National Intelligence Council is American CIA, Central Intelligence Agency. They focused on 2030 also because they have this kind of span in their provisions, but if you read that report, together with other reports that concern Africa, Middle East, Caribbean and Mexico and things like that, they see 2030 as a threshold of instability for many fragile countries, fragile societies, due to climate change. Maybe I frightened you. I'm telling you that in a very, very short time, if we do not take serious measures, our world will be subject to extreme instability. There will be unexpected conflicts. There could be mass migrations. There could be shortages of water, food, and things like that. Maybe I frightened you. And now it's time maybe to give some optimism. We can call this part the planet of wonders, because, sorry if I use this term, Mother Earth sends us a message which is very, very encouraging. It says us, if you do not protect me, you will have lack of justice, lack of development, lack of security. But it also tells us, if you do protect me, you will get more justice, more peace, more stability, more development. Strange. But actually what it tells us is also, if you build justice, then you will protect me. If you build fair development, then you will protect me. If you build peace, then you will protect me. It's like a circular dynamics that I will try to explain to you. I think we can try to understand this phenomenon, this link, this nexus, thinking about this slogan, what's good for you is good for your planet. Many of you, especially the girls, are familiar with the healthy diet pyramid. You find it in many feminine magazines, the ones that you find at the hairdressers, where it says that you should eat according to some proportions. Now the slide was too little to write everything, but on top is red meat, right below is poultry, fishes and eggs, and then there is something like that. There is something strange. The foods that we should eat less are also the foods that have the highest impact on the environment in production. So, if you put together those two pyramids, it shows that if you eat the way which is best for your health, you also eat the way which is best for the health of the planet, in environmental terms. And this is already surprising. It could be a coincidence. But it's not all. If you eat the way which is best for your health, you protect the environment, and strangely enough, you build justice. Instead of having a world polarized between some regions in which we fight obesity, diabetes, and some regions in which they are starving, you have a balanced distribution of the access to food. You eliminate starvation. And then once again, let's think about the causes of the Second World War. If you have a balanced access to nutrition, nobody also have more brain power in developing countries. You have more instruction, you have the possibility to think about the future, and all in all, what does it make? It makes the foundation of peace. So, what Planet Earth is sending us as a message is that if you do what is really good for yourself, then you do what is really good for the planet, you build justice, and through this, you build peace. We might think that this is a coincidence, a very specific coincidence that concerns the world of nutrition, food. But the suspect is not yet something that I could state as scientifically sound. It's an intuition. What we suspect is that this is a general mechanism. If you protect the environment, you build justice and peace and quality of life. If you build justice, you end up protecting the environment and building peace, and so on. It's like a circle, everything. Except that now, at this stage, after what I told you, and after telling you that the catastrophe threshold is very near, it's very close in time, you might think, do we have the means to do so? Or is it just a desperate goal that we will never be able to attain? Some people in this perspective have the idea that we should build up some huge schemes that alter the balance of system Earth to counter global warming. They talked about geoengineering projects. There are many, I just quote one, sending into space various billions of small circular mirrors that would deflect sunlight. Well, it might work, but we don't know in the end in such a delicate balance what this will do, except that it would cost so much that we could just, redistribute wealth on planet Earth in a way that everyone is brought to cooperate to solve global warming in a simple way. Other people think that we will have a solution with new technologies, and they think about, for instance, nuclear fusion, a new form of energy which has been studied and which would give virtually endless energy with no pollution. But the truth is that we don't have to rely on these gigantic things or on new perspectives, new technologies and things like that. We can cope with the problem and kickstart the cycle of environment, peace, justice with a reasonable cost. It had been calculated, although it's controversial, but roughly it had been calculated by Sir Stern in one of his famous reports. But above all, what's the approach to solve the problem? Two professors from Princeton University, Sokolow and Pakula. I assure you they are professors, they are not vampires, notwithstanding the names, showed us the way with this theory called the stabilization wedges, cunei di stabilizzazione. What they said is, well, instead of waiting for nuclear fusion, if we just decrease the impact, the emissions in CO2, sector by sector, marginally. For instance, if we decrease the emissions of CO2 in transportation by 3%, in industry by 2%, in agriculture by 1.5%, and so on. This is all feasible with reasonable costs, and we could get to the solution. We could avoid the disaster, the catastrophe that is looming on us. But if it is so, I mean, if the cost is reasonable, we don't have to wait for science fiction, new things. Why don't we do that? Why don't we make the right choice? The public is not really aware, but governments are aware of what is going to happen. Universities are aware of what is going to happen. And public is not kept unaware intentionally, it's just that it doesn't pay a lot of attention. There are some mechanisms that prevent us in this stage, notwithstanding the importance of the danger and how close it is to really take a big collective decision. One is illusion of sustainability, sector by sector. And if I work in the oil and gas sector, I've been hearing for 30 years that oil is finishing. And every single year I keep hearing that there are new oil wells being discovered. So, in my perspective, unsustainability is a myth. But, in my perspective and in my own interest, if finding more and more oil wells means kickstarting a chain of events that will create instability there where I have my oil wells, where I extract my gas, with all the costs implied, maybe if I broaden my point of view, then sustainability becomes unsustainability. Another mechanism, which is very common, is that since the threat is so huge and is shared by everyone, the impression is, it's not mine. It belongs to everyone, but not to me. What can I do? I mean, who am I to do something, etc. But the real problem is the structure of modern market economy, which is polarized between successful and unsuccessful, poor and rich. After a period in which market economy was regulated and addressed towards some social results, we thought that we lost a lot in terms of efficiency, so we decided to deregulate. But deregulating, you open more grounds for competition. When you have open competition, you're just forced, obliged to survive, not to take into account some social and collective emergencies. I would skip the technicalities of this part, but roughly it works like that. In a very competitive market, only a company that reaches a considerable size can survive. So it's like a rush. Everyone, among every single company to survive. If you are into a rush, you cannot afford to take the costs of some social precautions and of some environmental precautions. Now, the fact is that economy, although we live in democratic systems, economy generally tends to dominate politics. Politics has not been insensitive to these problems, and they tried to introduce some remedies. Piggovian taxes, technology transfers, cap-and-trade systems, and limits and rules to the emissions and things like that. But the market, and especially this very competitive market, perceives this intervention like an interference, like something that is likable to a virus. And economy has its own antibodies. Some of them are a certain dose of control on politics. So, do we have to be discouraged? I mean, we said, the problem is there, it is visible. People do not react to it for many reasons, among them the fact that economy as it is very hardly digests what we should have to kickstart, to cope with the problem. So, is there a solution? It looks like everything is paralyzed, and if we look around, it really looks like it's paralyzed. We know that the threat is there, we know it is very serious, we know it is very close in time, but nobody really does anything. There is a new line of intervention which has been now studied, which is making the advantages of this circle between justice, quality of life, environment, and development visible to the economy. Once again, I don't want to get into a very technical thing, but so far it is invisible because we have measured the success of our economies and of our societies as a whole only in monetary terms, with the famous national product as an instrument. We decide whether this year or next year we have been successful or unsuccessful according to the growth of the national product. But the national product doesn't take into account many things which are essential for our welfare. Like, imagine we launch a new very successful company in our city that builds whatever it is. But this company pollutes so much that it highly raises the rate of cancers in that city. So, measured in the perspective of the national product, this company is a big success. Measured from a broader perspective, which takes into account the human tragedies, the costs implied by healthcare of people which have been affected by cancers, the loss in income of the families due to this problem, this big success could prove to be a big failure. So, the idea is that we should start reasoning and measuring our performance according to instruments which are much broader than the national product. My proposal is what I showed to you before, what we can call Gaia's matrix. We should start measuring our success according to an accounting system that also considers other factors, among them the environment. Of course, this is not Mastroianni's new idea. It comes out of a long line of reasoning. It's shared by many institutions, among them UNEP, UNDP, and other things. And maybe UNDP, United Nations Development Programs, is the pioneer in this direction, because for other reasons, for social reasons, they were the first one to say national product is not enough. And they created an index, the Human Development Index, which is now very, very popular, in which they pair together with traditional national gross product indexes, other indexes like life expectancy and things like that. The work is very difficult. It needs a lot of scientific thought, technical thought, but many institutions are engaged in it. First and foremost, the World Bank, which is studying a new accounting system. So the idea is the market feels that when politics tries to intrude in its functioning to protect something vital like our stability in 15 years, it's like a virus. So it reacts and dominates politics. How do? We make these goals, which are essential, visible to the market, including them in terms of the measurement of our performance. If we do so, if we manage to do so, and we have really, really short time, what do we open? Well, you remember the two pyramids, food pyramid and environmental impact. The result is that if we do what's necessary to protect the environment, what has been forecasted in treaties like the Kyoto Protocol, on the scale which is necessary to cope with the problem, which includes transferring technology and things like that, we automatically build a more just world, a more balanced world, and so a more peaceful world. And this is the result we would really like to attain. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. I think that was a truly inspirational talk, and also it dovetails quite well with what we've been talking about in class. So I think it's going to be fun because we're going to have a lot of questions. I myself jotted down quite a few, but I mean, before I say anything else, for all of you who read Italian, we should also be saying that there is a Dr. Mastroianni's latest book is called L'Arca di Noè. Is by Edizione Chiare Lettere, so go out and buy it. I've seen it at Ca' Foscarini. It's Ca' Foscarini. It's right in front of our university. So as you said, like, you know, do it right now. Do it at once. It's out there. You can, and so you can keep sort of like the focus of this important topic. I myself, I mean, I think I'm going to break the ice. Also, I'm going to use my privilege as the chair by asking the first question, and then also this is going to give you some more time to think of yours. And my question is really, flows from what you were saying. I mean, in a way, it is difficult for decision makers, for practitioners, for diplomats to take into account the urgency of this environmental threat as they go through their day-to-day business. So I wanted to ask you if you wear your Havre hat, not the one of a successful author, but the hat of the diplomat, of a deputy ambassador, whether you can make us a few examples of negotiations, treaties, not much treaties, but negotiations, day-to-day diplomatic and security maneuverings, where the environment has been interiorized as an important topic by decision makers. I mean, do you think that we are there? Do you think that decision makers, the principals, have it at the back of their mind when they enter something like Geneva II, or when they enter the talks about, for example, the Persian Gulf security architecture, or is it something that is still, you know, lies outside the room?
Well, it's in between. Let's say that there is more and more awareness. German presidency of the Security Council in 2009 declared that the problem is there after a negotiation. United Nations Secretary General issued a report to the General Assembly stating that the problem, exactly as I have illustrated it to you, is there. Now, does it enter into actual negotiations and things like that? Very marginally, and that's why we have to raise awareness. The problem is too big to neglect it.
So now I'm going to open the floor, so feel free if any of you have any questions related to this or related to what we discussed in class. Go ahead. There is a microphone here, but if you can just shout, I think it's gonna be easier.
Many think that traditional economy and the exploitation of natural resources are not sustainable anymore. I read about Latouche and his concept of growth. I was wondering what you think about it, and if you know other alternatives to traditional economy.
I radically disagree. I think that growth is absolutely necessary to protect the environment. Unless we want to interpret his words in another way, degrowth is against human nature. If you ask society to stop progressing in the name of the environment, it would be a lost battle. But then, we need growth, we need hope, we need to progress. But then the question is not about quantity, it's about quality. We can ask ourselves where we want to grow and where we want to progress. One thing is to have every 2 weeks a new iPhone because it's fashionable. Another thing is to focus on giving services, on sanitation, on schooling, on things like that. I believe we have to grow. Without growth, mankind is not itself. It's deeply inside our nature, but then we can choose to grow where it's good for the environment, it's good for justice, it's good for peace. And it does not necessarily coincide with consumerism, but it is not degrowth. Thank you.
Thanks. A second question, even in Italian, if you feel too shy to ask it in English, so go ahead, don't hesitate. Go ahead.
Ah, ok, lo so.
Volevo fare il paio con la domanda del professor De Grenzi, chiedeva quanto l'ambiente entra in negoziazioni alla fine dei fatti e quanta consapevolezza ci sia da parte dei politici, dei diplomatici, legando ambiente e economia. Non so quanta mancanza di consapevolezza ci sia in realtà, perché per la mia tesi specialistica ho studiato il summit di Rio, quindi è il legame tra sicurezza e ambiente. Ma soprattutto 2 giorni fa leggo una notizia che dai file correlati con degli Snowden Files, trovate una notizia che al summit di Copenaghen sull'ambiente la NSA, National Security Agency, controllava le comunicazioni di molti delegati da parte del mondo, quindi controllava mail, telefonate, microfoni nelle stanze dove si chiamano le comunicazioni. Tutto questo per fare in modo che non si avesse un risultato concreto nell'alzare i limiti delle emissioni di CO2. La faccio, l'ho fatta in semplice. Però, voglio dire, penso che nel momento in cui c'è da non si vuole ottenere un risultato che vada contro la crescita economica attuale, il modello attuale di crescita economica, la politica o certi stati usano anche i mezzi più efficienti per bloccare le risorse ambientali.
Allora, la consapevolezza in realtà c'è. Le fonti che uso io appunto non sono quelle del forum di Porto Alegre, ma sono fonti di intelligence dei militari, eccetera, eccetera. Ci sono studi degli americani che dicono per noi il cambiamento climatico può essere una tragedia perché ci rende molto più costoso l'accesso alle risorse in certe parti del mondo, dovremmo difenderle con degli apparati militari, eccetera, eccetera, eccetera. Poi c'è naturalmente una consapevolezza di settore, perché tutti quelli che stanno lavorando sullo sviluppo di Kyoto, eccetera, sono consapevoli della cosa, quelli che lavorano all'UNEP sono consapevoli della cosa, eccetera. Quanto si riesce a calare il nesso fra gli effetti già in corso dei cambiamenti climatici e altri problemi da risolvere, per esempio la Siria, eccetera, no? Allora, questo livello di sofisticazione non siamo ancora arrivati. A Ginevra non parlano delle cause legate al cambiamento climatico, eccetera, eccetera. Poi NSA, eccetera. Vorrei far notare però che non bisognerebbe fare di buttarne un fascio. Finora uno degli approcci più progrediti di green economy che siano venuti fuori è stato proprio quello di Obama con il suo Green Stimulus Package, che appunto non è nel senso di growth, è nel senso della growth, ma una growth basata su una qualità della vita diversa.
Okay, I think we can all thank Dr. Mastroianni for coming to join us, so let's give him a big round.